Okay, this is part 2 of Carl Jung quotes. He says, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Now that's an important quote because that's basically a refutation of Freud. Freud basically tries to get you trapped into constantly thinking about your childhood. Oh, I'll never be happy because, my parents spanked me too much. Okay, that's BS. Everybody's had some ups and downs during their childhood. You live and learn and you move on. And so what I'm saying is, Carl Jung says, look to the future. Ask yourself, what's the best that I can do? I can choose to shape my destiny. Whereas Freud was more, we're just helplessly ruined because of all the problems we had as a child. So Freud is degrading you, and he's making you hate your family, hate your life, making them hate you. He's just stirring up hatred and obsessing over the past. A person who obsesses over the past has difficult time getting on to the future. What you want to do is say, look, I made mistakes, I learned from them, now I shall go forward. What's the best I can do? Okay, so I think Carl Jung is really a giant step in the right direction, away from psychoanalysis and all that craziness of Freud. But I also think Carl Jung is weak in comparison. And the best psychology is Christianity. It says, look, you're half screwed, but you're also half fortunate, you're lucky to be alive. We all live in this giant world that's a struggle between goodness and evil. Try to be a force for good in the world. Okay, take up your cross and accept your fate and your destiny and make the most of it. Okay, that works. All right, Jung felt experimental science was not adequate by itself to understand the human soul because it only can rely on facts. You have to go way deeper than that into understanding. The more secular, materialistic, and compulsively extroverted our civilization becomes, the greater the unhappiness, the senselessness, the aimlessness of our lives. Atheism doesn't work because it says life is meaningless. And if you say life is meaningless, then why try? Why do anything? Why not just get drunk, try to get laid? Why bother with anything? So atheism leads to poor outcomes, low resilience, and they don't create anything. People who are atheists, they create next to nothing in art. There's nothing. When you want to create art like Christian art, you're inspired, to honor God, to recognize the beauty of God's creation, and it pushes you to do great, beautiful things. That's why almost 99.9% of the great art, the great literature, it's all Christian. All this multiculturalism stuff is a bunch of nonsense. Non-Christian cultures don't create hardly anything. When you look close, you will see that that is the case. There are some exceptions to that, but not too many. Okay, that's why the Western civilization is the best civilization that ever existed. That's why everybody wants to move to Western civilization. And then once they get there, unless they become a little bit Christianized or at least have Christian ethics, they want to destroy the place and turn it into a third world crap hole like the places they came from. Okay, Carl Jung continues. Science stops where logic stops. Imagination, feeling, and myth can go way beyond that. Yes, myth is more individualistic and expresses humans in a more accurate way than does science. The more myth we know, the more we value life. Yeah, study Greek mythology. You'd be amazed at how useful that is. Warmth is the vital element for the growing of a plant and for the soul of a child. Loneliness does not come from having no one about one, but it comes from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding certain views which others find inadmissible. Life's greatest problems can never be solved, but only outgrown. There can be no recrossing of the Rubicon. The Rubicon is the river that Julius Caesar crossed when he's going to come back into Rome with his legions. He wasn't going to come back alone. He's going to come back with his legions. Okay, Carl Jung. A man grows with the greatness of his task. Yeah, have high goals and ambitions because that pushes you to make more of an effort to achieve at a higher level. This is a biographer comparing Carl Jung to T.S. Eliot and Toynbee. He said, as William James points out, the first stage in the process of individuation is the realization that there is something wrong as we naturally stand. Without this realization, nothing happens. Yeah, that's why you have to be able to objectively stand out of the box, so to speak, of conformity and convention and look at it and say, well, gee, like what got me to realize that conventional medicine was not that good was I was fat and conventional medicine couldn't tell me how to lose the weight. My father had coronary heart disease, conventional medicine couldn't cure him, and my mother had cancer, and conventional medicine couldn't cure her. So I'm like, oh my God, I got to start seeing if there's any other ways to fix these problems. And there were. I just wish I found out about them sooner. Carl Jung on individualism. The more a man's life is shaped by the collective norm, the greater his individual immorality. Yeah, people do very evil things in a crowd. Carl Jung, individualism is priceless. From the beginning, I had a sense of destiny, as though my life was assigned to me by fate and had to be fulfilled. This gave me an inner security. This gave me the strength to go my own way. Often I had the feeling that in all decisive matters I was no longer amongst men, but was alone with God. Yeah. So he had that religious thing. It makes you smarter, too. It enables you to think in a better way. I can tell you, there's a very good reason why, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, because I want to be part of the group that did all these great things. Okay, I want to be a great writer, a great thinker, a great scientist. Well, that's where most of them come from. Okay, Carl Jung, the decisive question for a man is he related to something infinite or not? Because, it's an insult to yourself to be an atheist. It says you're nothing but a talking monkey. Okay, then you're in the atheistic Darwinism group of thinking. Okay, it's an insult, I think, to be Protestant. Don't get me wrong, there's some okay Protestants, and I like the fact that priests can get married, but, and I do think, they started to appreciate art more with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, but you ever go in a Protestant church, it stinks. No paintings, no statues, secular stuff. Go into a Catholic cathedral and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Okay, the decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? Religion is a basic human need. Okay, Anthony Stevens on Carl Jung. Religious beliefs and practices are universally characteristic of human communities and archetypally determined. The majority of my patients consisted not of believers, but of those who had lost their faith. The ones who came to see me were the lost sheep. Among all my patients under 35 years of age, all had a problem finding a religious outlook on life. Every one of them had fallen ill because he had lost what the living religions of every age have given their followers. And none of them has really been healed who did not regain his religious outlook. Okay, do you hear what he's saying there? Those are pretty strong words. What he's saying is, when people lose their religion, they become weak and they get sick and they become sad. And they have to regain their religion in order to feel strong and resilient and hopeful. And that's pretty much true. I've seen lots of people go atheists and then they commit suicide or they become drug addicts, alcoholics, losers. Okay, the great ones, Bach, Michelangelo, they're very religious, devout, Newton, etc. It makes you stronger. It says life has meaning. It says, yes, you should go for it. No matter all your suffering, your problems, your setbacks, your failures, your disappointments, you go for it. Okay, that's good for people. Carl Jung, the idea of a moral order and God belong to the ineradicable substrate of the human soul. Okay. Okay, Carl Jung continues. Everywhere in the West, there are subversive minorities who, sheltered by humanitarianism and our sense of justice, hold their torches ready with nothing to stop the spread of their ideas. Accept the critical reason of a single, fairly intelligent, mentally stable stratum of the population. One should not, however, overestimate the thickness of this stratum. The mass crushes out the insight and reflection that are still possible with the individual. Rational argument can be conducted with some prospect of success only so long as the emotionality of a given situation does not exceed a critical degree. If the effective temperature rises above this level, the possibility of reasons having any effect ceases, and in its place is taken by slogans and chimerical wish fantasies, which rapidly develops into a psychic epidemic. As with all dangers, we can only guard against it when we know what it is. In order to free the sovereign from restrictions, it tries to cut the ground from under the religions, to prevent the individual from having anything to rely on but themselves or itself, the tyrant. It is possible to have an alternative point of view. So what he's basically saying is a tyrant will come in and it'll take the religion away from the people. And it doesn't want them to have any alternative perspective. It'll rewrite history. It'll tell them the only way to understand this is their way. All right, and he's saying the religion lets you see things from an entirely different way. A Christian can say, no, ruler, you are not the top. Christ is the top. God is the top, okay? I follow God, not you. I'll pay taxes to you because I have to, but I follow God. That's what determines how I think and what I believe and what I know to be true, not your nonsense, okay? So rulers don't like that because it diminishes their power. It builds up the little guy and it brings down the ruler. That's why tyrants don't like it. Okay, Carl Jung continues. It is possible to have an alternative point of view only when there is a point of reference outside the mainstream. The religions that give or claim to give such a standpoint thereby enable the individual to exercise his own judgment and his own power of decision. The religions teach that there is another authority and one that is opposed to that of the world. That's a valuable thing, okay? Like I notice when I talk to a lot of people from Europe or I talk from America, the people from Europe in general, there's plenty of exceptions, but in general, they've got a much bigger philosophical worldview because they've seen all the different countries of Europe and the pros and cons of each one. Whereas typical American went to a public school, they don't know anything, they think what they learned in a public school was true, and they're just kind of like, a gap-toothed, clueless, illiterate idiot. And unless they want to learn, they have to recognize that they have a deficiency and want to learn. Okay, let's continue here. The doctrine of the individual dependence on God makes just as high a claim upon him as the world does. Oh, I got to go. We'll make this the end of part 2. We'll do part 3 a little bit later.